Michael. Tennessee was the first today. Welcome everybody. A new day has dawned. Denmark, God bless you. Italiana, no? Benvenuto, buongiorno. Good morning. Alberta, Canada, what a spread. That's wonderful. God bless you all. Good morning. It's wonderful we could open our eyes again today. Philadelphia, here I am, the city of brotherly love. And even Bethlehem is here. Now it's completely just over the Golan. Oops, sorry about that. Tripod here. Nice reflection there already in the weeds. You hear the nature, the birds. Welcome to Magdala at the Sea of Galilee. As we enjoy this new day. It's another comeback for nature. Oh, did you see those birds? They wouldn't die so fast. This is heavy stuff for early morning. What are we going to read now from the Acts of the Apostles? We're continuing in chapter 14. And Paul and Barnabas are on this incredible missionary journey, mostly in present-day Turkey, in that area. And this is what happens, people. This is very tough stuff. In those days, some Jews from Antioch and Iconium arrived and won over the crowds. Now, I want you to remember the context we explained the other day about this whole tension between the Jews and the disciples of Jesus. They won over the crowds. They stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing that he was dead. Now, I'm not sure if you imagine what a person would look like after being stoned. You have people pelting stones at him. And I imagine they're aiming for the head, and some of them will miss. And at some point, that person will fall down. This is very, very gruesome stuff, people, early in the morning. But when the disciples gathered around him, he got up and entered the city. Come on. You know, this is amazing. This is amazing. On the following day, he left with Barnabas for Derbe, another town. And after they had proclaimed the good news to that city, so they're already proclaiming the good news again after being so harassed, not just morally, but also physically. And not just physically, but also morally. Because what's the greater hurt delivered? And they had proclaimed the good, after they had proclaimed the good news to that city and made a considerable number of disciples, they returned to Lystra and Iconium and exhorted them to persevere in the faith. These are tough dudes. These have a new strength, an incredible morale, an incredible willpower, an amazing endurance. And what were they saying to them as they encouraged the disciples? It is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. Now that's a powerful line to try to endure. Wow, did you see all those birds? That was the biggest squadron of fighter birds I've seen for a long time. They're actually parrots. They fly in formation, and they fly in usually as a nice group. But I normally don't see them that big. So people, how do you understand Paul and Barnabas? They didn't sue those who were persecuting them. It doesn't sound like they hated them. And they definitely weren't subdued by them in spirit. They might still be curing some wounds. This is an amazing reality, a human reality that has happened. It's a new thing for humanity. It's a new dawn that people will endure that kind of brutality and suffering and stand up and proclaim good news. And the good news entails that we have to endure sufferings and tribulations and trials. So, most of the time, tribulation and trials seem to be on top of us, and we're at their mercy. But here it feels like these guys are on top of tribulations. They're not cowed down, they're not broken because of tribulations. They might be hurting, they are hurting, they're taking serious blows, but their spirit is not broken. This is an amazing reality, people. And you see this. You see this in people of faith in the midst of terrible disease, economic hardship, relationship problems, the understanding that this is part of the forging of glory. And it's in a very different sense than those ancient hero soldiers who went out and had their swords swinging and they were taking some wounds in the process and they were doing it for glory. This is to give God glory. That the truth of God will be recognized and honored. And we have to bear sufferings in that process. It's a whole new logic. And there's no hatred, there's no revenge, there's no violence returned. Only forgiveness and understanding, mercy, and the desire to embrace our enemy, our enemies, those who oppose us. What a change. And there's an echo really in that line that Paul, that's here in the Acts of the Apostles. They exhorted them to persevere in the faith, saying, it is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. And there you see an incredibly beautiful truth that's echoed. It echoes Luke 24. This stranger is walking along with the two disciples on the way to Emmaus and says to them, explains the scriptures and says, was it not necessary that the Son of Man should endure all this, as the scriptures have shown, and so enter his glory? And beginning with the prophets and the Torah and the Psalms and the writings, he explained to them the whole path of messianic redemption as it should be understood. And you know, people, we have a hard time accepting that logic. We need a lot of faith. We need a lot of rays of sunlight reaching and touching our souls, lighting up a path of new light that we did not actually expect to be in that way. We all have to go through this learning curve to appreciate that. Let's take a little hike, and we'll be reflecting on these thoughts for a moment, processing the incredible change of mentality that we need. You know, we often style ourselves as Christians and consider ourselves Christians, but actually to be a Christian is something else. It's beautiful to see Paul and Barnabas following in the steps of Jesus in that point. And just think where Paul was not so long earlier, persecuting the Christians. And just think today how many Christians are suffering. It's really amazing that that's still going on. And one of the most beautiful things is how the grace of God works in the hearts and minds and worldview of persecuted Christians. They don't hate. They're very frustrated. And maybe they do have problems with dealing with thoughts of hostility. But that's part of the transforming process, because as they mature, that's all transformed. It's completely transformed. So there a prayer starts emerging in our hearts. Lord, transform me. And I'm not living necessarily in a situation of persecution. Maybe sometimes people laugh at me, or I feel that I'll get some strange looks if I stop to say a little prayer at the restaurant. But then there are other situations where people hurt me with their words, with their sometimes actions, with their attitudes. And you know, folks, it's not easy to deal with that. But to discover that new way of a new approach, it really requires a transformation of our mindset. We need a transformation. We need to think differently if we are following Jesus. Because to be following Jesus is not just to do a ritual and to say I'm a Christian. To follow Jesus is a thorough transformation, a new birth. Living in a new world on a new level. You know, what are our political attitudes before political opponents? And even when there are very grave things and grave issues, are we able to distinguish between the person who is in a position, who is in a position very different than ours? Are we able to distinguish between the situation of that person and the issues? And how is our contribution to political discourse? Where there is turmoil, let me bring peace. Where there is hatred and hostility, let me bring love. Let me bring understanding. We need new attitudes, new growth. We need light coming into the darkness. How many Christians we all need to change. Imagine a relative does something horrible and we start talking badly to others about it. How can they do this? Are we not able to bear a little humiliation, a little burden? Imagine Barnabas and Saul being stoned and left for dead. And this happened, Paul, how many times was he stoned? There's a big flock of birds flying down there. Let me see if I can catch them for you. They're too far away, I think. Yeah. Lord, transform our hearts, transform our minds, transform our values. Lord, maybe I have to die to self in order to be more like you, to follow in your footsteps. Lord, help me to become more like you. That was chapter 14 of Acts of the Apostles. The reading for today's Mass starts at verse 19 and it goes to 28. The psalm is, "Your friends make known, O Lord, the glorious splendor of your kingdom." That's Psalm 145. Your friends make known, O Lord, the glorious splendor of your kingdom. That's actually verse 12. You know, who are the friends of God? I think at this point we could say Barnabas and Saul are pretty friends of God. And look how they're making known the splendor of his kingdom. The victory in human nature over all the passions, especially over hatred and revenge. And the victory in human nature that despite persecution one is able to continue pushing along. Sorry about that, people scribbled on me on the tripod. And then we have the reading from the Gospel today is John chapter 14 also. It's the end of the chapter. And Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid." And just think of this in the context of Paul and Barnabas. Do not be afraid. And Paul will be stoned a number of times more. He'll be shipwrecked. He'll be scourged with whips like Jesus was. And he will continue preaching, and then he will be martyred. "My peace I give you." What type of peace do they have in their hearts? Not as the world gives peace do I give peace. Peace sometimes is attained by crushing the enemy with sufficient bombs. This is not the peace Jesus brings. It looks like he's the crushed one on Calvary. Paul is crushed by stoning, and they're the ones proclaiming peace. Peace I give you, not as the world gives peace. The peace we have in our families, that we're called to bring, to raise children to appreciate the peace that Christ brings, to overcome the cultural hostilities, the political hostilities that are often passed on generation to generation. There are terrible injustices, being stoned for preaching the good news. Peace I give you, not as the world gives it, do I give you peace. Do not be afraid. People, God bless you. It was delightful being with you this morning, watching the sunrise, especially the sunrise of a whole different outlook in the world that Jesus brought. That light still has to spread to overcome so much darkness. God bless you as you spread that light. In your families, teaching a new generation with words if necessary, but especially with lifestyle, with reactions when things go wrong. Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Not as the world gives it, do I give it to you. May you have a very blessed day today. And send a note to somebody where there was a little trouble in the past, and express in a gentle way that's proportionate to how they can accept it. Some gestures of reconciliation, just kindness. How are you doing? How are you holding up? Thinking of you. God bless you. People, see you later, alligator. All the best.